Breathing in peace, exhaling love. Coming into this beautiful moment, we breathe in and we let go. Welcoming our YouTube familia. We just actually listened to the song Soon You'll Get Better by Taylor Swift featuring the Dixie Chicks, and it's quite an emotional song. And before I go into today's talk, I just really want to hold space for that and recognizing that sometimes when I talk about neutral-mindedness, it can come across as cold and distant. But really, it's about fully leaning into all emotions and really fully acknowledging and honoring. And then as we process them, eventually we get to a place of more of a neutralness about it. But the neutralness really is just another way of saying we're not judging something. You know, we're always going to feel pain. I mean, that's inevitable because of our impermanence and the constant changing tides in life. So it's important to never think that neutral-mindedness is completely pushing away all pain or all grief, etc. It's just getting to the point where we're no longer judging it, or we're no longer resisting it, or we're no longer chasing after the things of tomorrow that are not actually here presently, that keep us out of the present moment. So it's just really entering without an agenda, without constantly adding stories to right here, right now, and holding space for what presently exists. And so I just wanted to kind of clarify that since we just listened to that song. So deep breath. Excellent. One more. And here we are. So today I'm going to actually be reading a little bit from Thich Nhat Hanh's book, The Heart of Buddha's Teachings, Transforming Suffering into Peace, Joy, and Liberation. It's a wonderful book, and I'll just be sharing a couple excerpts shortly. But first things first, those of you who have handouts, I just love this. There was a line in the book that said this: where there is perception, there is deception. Isn't that clever? Where there is perception. Where there is perception, there is deception. And then later on, it said, thinking is the speech of our mind. So really absorb that for a moment. Thinking is the speech of our mind. And before all that, they actually, Thich Nhat Hanh actually shared, and most of you probably have heard this quote before by the French philosopher Descartes. He said, he's the famous guy who said, I think, therefore I am. Who's ever heard that before? I think, therefore I am. And then Thich Nhat Hanh shares his perception, which it is, I think, therefore I am not. And that's his teaching. I think, therefore I am not. So let's break that down. So Descartes, I think, therefore I am. And what's fascinating, a lot of European philosophers around that time, they weren't the happiest folks. There was definitely some movements where it's kind of like life is suffering. And it's not the Buddhist perception of life is suffering. It's more of just, if you fully look at the world and the constant changing and the loss and the death and the illness and all these things, it's just, how can you ever be happy? And what's interesting is that actually seeped into modern psychology when psychology first started coming out, where it almost was taught, I don't know if it ever fully was, but it was almost taught that if you were happy, something was wrong with you. Because life was just, if you fully understood psychology, life was just a shit show. And if you ever watched the documentary Happy, it might still be on Netflix. There is the psychologist in it who finally woke up to this realization when I think it was his granddaughter said to him one day, she just looked up at him and said, Happy, why do you always look so miserable? Maybe she said sad or unhappy, but why do you always look so unhappy? And that sparked something in him, because in the psychology that he was brought up in, it was always studying what was wrong with human mind, the human predicament, if you will. And then from that point on, you started to see the evolution of positive psychology. And that's what you're now starting to see in a lot of therapists' office, where it's not just about diagnosing and then figuring out what's wrong with you, and then there's not necessarily a full solution. Now we're starting to recognize that it's not just how our brains are set up, but it's also the way in which we're perceiving the world. And if you change the perception, it actually can alleviate a lot of the symptoms that we think that we're just stuck with for the rest of our lives. An example is, of course, depression. That's one that often psychology can be of a great benefit with. And Thich Nhat Hanh kind of doesn't say that specifically, but he definitely goes into that. But I just love that we had, because of the philosophy that came over here is definitely hued with an interesting tint. And then Thich Nhat Hanh goes on and says, I think, therefore I am not, which is saying pretty much that where there is perception, there is deception, because the thinking mind often takes us out of the present moment. It adds stories, it adds labels, it adds an agenda, it adds I guess the main word that I use in Living Peace is a mental overlay. You create a mental overlay on top of the neutral reality, and all of a sudden, everything that you perceive is hued through that overlay. It becomes the pick any colored glasses. We often say rose-colored glasses, but there's shit-colored glasses, and there's this color. There's all sorts of colored glasses that we adopt, and it comes back to our belief systems. So today, I'm going to share a bit about. So in Buddhism, they have the Eightfold Path, and normally you have right view, right thinking, right mindfulness, but I'm going to shift that vocabulary and just say aligned thinking and aligned view. And so it just softens it a little bit. And especially how Thich Nhat Hanh teaches it, when he says right and wrong, it's not so much a judgment involved in it. Really a more effective translation for us would be aligned. Are you missing the mark or not? When you're having an arrow and you're shooting the bullseye, is it hitting the mark or is it not? And if you're not hitting the mark, it's not some judgment or awful thing. It's just recognizing that you're not hitting the mark. So it softens the approach, because sometimes when we say write this, write that, write this, write this, in our Western minds, we instantly start feeling all the pressure. And then we say, fuck that. I don't need more pressure in my life. So aligned view, aligned thinking. Let's take a breath. But before I get into that, let's talk a little bit about, and it goes into the first tenet perfectly, mastery of thought, which includes the art of belief and the art of illusion. And so with aligned view, our views, really another word for that is our belief systems and our subconscious mind. And so think about the ways in which you perceive life. So think of aligned view. This is just a helpful tooltip if you want to use it. You don't have to. But think of aligned view as your belief systems, and think of aligned thinking as your conscious mind. So you have your subconscious mind, and then you have your conscious mind. The view is just like the whole mental overlay that you're just constantly perceiving on a daily basis. And then the thinking is just what spontaneously pops up. And they definitely feed into each other. But what's fascinating is Thich Nhat Hanh shared an example of art very similar to the file exchange, where you change out one thought for another thought. You change out one file for another file. The example he gave was you change out in a wheel, you change out one rotting the peg leg out, and then you put in a new piece of wood. And so it strengthens the whole wheel so that it can carry you forward in life. And so I just thought that was pretty cool, that it was almost like mirroring what we already said in Living Peace. And again, I wrote this before I ever read this book. So it's just, I love whenever there's those cool moments of synchronicity that occurs. So again, going back, aligned view is the belief systems that we have. And then, of course, aligned thinking is just our daily conscious thoughts. I know I repeat myself a lot there, but hey, sinks in. So one of my favorite, this is going to sound really silly, but it's pop culture and it relates to the masses. So who's ever watched True Blood? I love that show. It's a bit all over the place at times, but it has one episode, one scene in it that I think captures death, dying, and grieving so beautifully, so raw. And it's when, and I'm not spoiling anything if you haven't seen it because it happens early in the show, but it's when her gram dies. And Suki, the main character, she's a telepath. And so she can hear everyone's thoughts. And so she's at the funeral and she has to go up because she's the only really main relative. I mean, she has a brother, but she's the main one that's going to speak and do everything. But she's up at the podium about to talk about her grams. And she's hearing everyone's thoughts about what happened. And a lot of it is just people's projections and their own judgments and their own opinions on it. And a lot of them were not negative. I mean, a lot of them were not positive. They were very judgmental, governing the circumstance of the death, some of them blaming her for it, and then other people just so in pity. And so even pity can be a judgment, as we know. And so just being able to stand up there and just have it all hit you. And of course she freaks out. And then it's just a really cool moment. But then later on, it skips to her house, and then all these townspeople, because it's a small town, they're all bringing casseroles over, just casserole after casserole after casserole after casserole. And again, it's like she's still hearing their thoughts, and it's just like, if I get one more fucking casserole, because people, and then she could hear how people were making it about them, rather than actually holding space for her and her and her brother's loss. And so it was just such an interesting to witness that in a show that captured what really goes on behind the scenes. And I think those of you who might be empaths actually can pick up on this at times when you're in a room and you can feel when there's a disalignment, or you can feel judgment from coming from someone. Not everyone can feel that, but there's definitely a lot of people that can. And so what I wanted to share with this is it's not just about saying or doing the quote right thing, as in the Eightfold Path is right action or aligned action. It's also making sure that our mind and our body and our spirit is completely clear. And that's why in Dunashu we emphasize the non-duality and the non-judgment so importantly, because when we go into session or when we go into just daily life and we're interacting with the world, there's absolutely no agenda there, and we're able to just hold space and be there. Because I always tell my students, especially later on in the program when we get even deeper into Dunashu studies, pretend that everyone can hear your thoughts. Pretend that everyone can hear your thoughts. How would that change? Right? How would that change your thinking? How would that change your thinking? And that really does capture the essence of this teaching. It's not just about saying or doing the aligned thing. It's making sure that our belief systems and our own thoughts, our everyday thoughts, are in alignment as well. And so that's just a fun food for thought. And if you like True Blood and you've watched it, maybe, or you have the season, go back and watch that episode. It's early on in the season, and view it from this perception, and you're gonna be like, oh, that just nails it home. If we had a huge screen TV, I'd be like, okay, people, the next 10 minutes, True Blood. Don't know if that's ever been done in a church setting before. But that's why we like it here. So let's take a breath. And later on in the chapter, Thich Nhat Hanh said a very popular Zen saying is think non-thinking. Think non-thinking. And he was saying when you get to a place of aligned thinking and aligned view, you really do get to a place of think non-thinking, which there's just no more there's always going to be a slight overlay, but it's not coming from the ego, the three aspects of ego anymore, which the three aspects of ego that I talk about in my book are push, pull, hold tight. Am I resisting? Am I chasing after? Am I holding on to things? And when you can relinquish that and come into the aligned view and the aligned thinking, you're able to fully just experience life as it is. I'm sure all of you know this feeling whenever you've gone into a forest. Right? Have any of you been on a nature walk before? It doesn't even have to be in nature, but you're just on a walk or on a hike, and you notice that you're still obviously thinking, you can never shut off the mind, but there's just no more storytelling. There's no more sizing things up. If you're surrounded by people, you might be sizing up the people. But when you're surrounded by trees, we generally don't have that mentality where we're comparing one tree to another tree or being bothered by the trees or wanting the trees to be different than what they are. And so hopefully you can relate to this and know what it feels like. And then learn, as we do these teachings, we learn to then take that essence into everyday life and into our everyday relationships. Again, it's so funny. I know I say this a lot, but it's just, to me, I find it so humorous that here's this gay Buddhist, quotations, because I'm more doing a show, but gay Buddhist cowboy dancing in a biker bar teaching line dancing, and then we bring in like underage kids, teenagers, and then some preteens, and it's just like, how is this happening? And it's just such a fascinating environment that maybe more traditionally we would say there's no spirituality there. There's no peace to be found there. But because we take the essence of these teachings into that environment, it becomes an actual place of deep, deep joy. And what's funny is before we get in there, there might have been a fight going on, but we've never seen a fight there. But the owner, she's like, you know, sometimes people get rowdy. But whenever they're there, because of how vibration, the law of attraction works, it's always a seamless experience. And it's been like that for 6 months. And so we're carrying the essence of Zen when we go into that environment, and that essence of non-judgment and the essence of just enjoying each other's company and the presence. And it leads to just really undiluted joy. So isn't that amazing to witness that even in the unlikeliest of places that you can find that, quote, enlightenment. You can find that ability to be fully there in the presence of aliveness with people that you care about. And it's a joyous experience. Interesting, huh? So breathe that in. So, and this is where I'm going to read some excerpts from it. So Thich Nhat Hanh shares 4 practices related to aligned thinking and aligned view from the Eightfold Path. And so I have it here down on your little pamphlet if you want to read along, but I'll go ahead, or just see the 4 tidbits, but I'll go ahead and read it here. The first one, asking ourselves, or it says, are you sure? But I'm going to say it as, am I sure? So are you sure? Am I sure? So if there is a rope in your path and you perceive it as a snake, fear-based thinking will follow. The more erroneous your perception, the more incorrect your thinking will be. Please write the words, are you sure? So that's an excellent thing. Grant, you don't have to write it down since we have it on the packet. But are you sure? On a large, please write the words, are you sure, on a large piece of paper and hang it where you will see it often. Ask yourself this question again and again, and again, unaligned perception causes incorrect thinking and unnecessary suffering. So really write that. I think that is, I love that idea. Maybe write it on a sticky note and place it on a fridge or on a mirror and write, am I sure? Or maybe on your bathroom mirror, for those of you who struggle when you look in the mirror and you have some judgments there, and then you read it and you're like, am I sure about the judgments I'm having about myself right now? Or are they a preconceived notion of what I think beauty is supposed to look like, what aging is supposed to look like, and what I think humanity is expectations are? You can see where that goes. But think about that. Am I sure? Am I fully sure about this? Or am I buying into some notion of beauty? Am I buying into some notion of success? Am I buying into some notion of what a relationship is supposed to look like? Am I buying into some notion of what enlightenment is supposed to look like? Am I buying into some notion of what peace is supposed to look like? You could see the list just goes on and on and on and on. And so having that double checking is really important. I talked about that practice. Is it still in the book, the U-turn, or is that more the first one? In the first living piece, I had, for the 4th tenet, ignorance is illusion, we seek understanding, I taught the U-turn practice, which was anytime you experience something or you have a judgment, it's go take a U-turn around it and look at it from a different vantage point. And so you might even have to do that a few times. Just look at all different angles, all different angles, all different angles. Just revisit it, but trying to come from a place of that neutral mindedness, because you likely missed some information just the first drive-by. Because a lot of times when we're just driving by, we're very reactive in that mode and we're not getting the full picture. Let's breathe that in. The second one is, what am I doing? Sometimes I ask one of my students, what are you doing? To help him release his thinking about the past or the future and return to the present moment. I ask the question to help him be right here, right now. To respond, he only needs to smile. That alone would demonstrate his true presence. Asking yourself, what am I doing, will help you overcome the habit of wanting to complete things quickly. Smile to yourself and say, washing this dish is the most important job in my life. When you ask, what am I doing, reflect deeply on the question. If your thoughts are carrying you away, you need mindfulness to intervene. When you're really there, washing the dishes can be a deep and enjoyable experience. But if you wash them while thinking about other things, you're wasting your time and probably not washing the dishes well either. If you are not there, even if you wash 84,000 dishes, your work will be without merit. So think about that for a moment. If we're not in full presence and full aliveness with what is happening around us, even though we're trying to do all of these things and build these monuments, build these temples, build these businesses, build these relationships of success, if we're not alive with them, on one hand, we're not even alive in that moment at all. But on second hand, I think all of us can relate to this. They don't really ever lead to lasting satisfaction, do they? Who's ever wanted something so bad and then you achieve it or you get it, but then you're never really fully present with it? Along the journey, you weren't present because you were wanting that thing, but then once you have it, you're not present with it either. And so you never actually get to enjoy the relationship. You never actually get to enjoy the quote success. You never actually get to enjoy absolutely anything. And that's another thing I often like to think. When we're going on a hike to the top of a mountain, a lot of times we want to just get to the top to experience the view. And so it's like some people have this habit of rushing to the top. But we're not recognizing that life is blossoming and flourishing around us. And if we slowed down and actually looked and took our time at what was around us, we would feel so much joy from that experience. But then what's interesting is who's ever been to the top and then you just want to get down now. You're just like, I'm up there, I did it. Time to get down. I wish there was a zip line. I made it. We're not recognizing that after it is also the climb down. And I think that mindset, because some of you may not have this, but it is a very big epidemic in our human consciousness. Like a lot of people have the idea, I just want to get to the wedding, just the wedding, get to the wedding. And it's all this buildup. But then what comes after it? Well, it's the climb down. There's a climax and then there's a climb down. And a lot of us do not enjoy the following climb down. And then we have expectation of what it's supposed to look like. And then it's amazing how many people, literally the day after the wedding, all these troubles and all these issues arise to the surface. Because again, it was the expectation of what it's going to look like, but then all of a sudden the story is completely different. And that happens when we're not living in the present moment, because when we're living in the present moment and being in the aliveness, then you're going to see all those things anyway. You're not projecting them to some future thing that will bring you happiness or joy or love or sense of security. You're alive in this now. So the question, what are you doing? That's meant to wake you up. And so if you write that on a sticky note, maybe somewhere in your car, and every time you look at it, ask yourself, I'm driving. Okay, I'm driving. I'm feeling the steering wheel. I'm seeing the trees or the cars around me. I'm seeing the road before me. Bring yourself back into the aliveness of the now. Do you follow me? Isn't that cool? Because often when you're driving, you're probably thinking of something else completely. The third one, I'll actually read this little thing more here. It's just kind of a fun story. Emperor Wu asked Bodhidharma, the founder of Zen Buddhism in China, how much merit he had earned by building temples all over the country. Bodhidharma said, none whatsoever. But if you wash one dish in mindfulness, if you build one small temple while dwelling deeply in the present moment, not wanting to be anywhere else, not caring about fame or recognition, their merit from that act will be boundless and you will feel very happy. Ask yourself, what am I doing often? When your thinking is not carrying you away and you do things in mindfulness, you will be happy and a resource for many others. And so I love that, because that's making sure that we're bringing our alignment to the party. Because think about it, you could be someone who hosts all these parties and not enjoy a single one, right? And so, but when you bring your presence and you bring your alignment to the party, then even if it's like not that great of a party, it becomes a great party because you're in alignment. And so even if all things go south and it just turned into a shit show, but if you brought your alignment to the party, it becomes a beautiful thing. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that wonderful to recognize it's not about the things that I'm doing in the world. It's about the spirit behind what I'm doing in the world. And if I do not have the spirit in alignment with all of that, then everything that I'm creating yes, it will probably still bring benefit to the world, and there's things that are going to achieve, there's still the life goes on and it's still benefiting, but your happiness is always going to be in question. Your peace is always going to be in question. And that's the number one thing to really recognize. Does that make sense? Let's take a breath. So the third one, and it's just a quick little thingamajig. Hello, habit energy. So that's the quote. We tend to stick to our habits, even the ones that cause us to suffer. Workaholism is one example. In the past, our ancestors may have had to work nearly all the time to put food on the table, but today, our way of working is rather compulsive and prevents us from having real contact with life. We think about our work all the time and don't even have time to breathe. We need to find moments to contemplate the cherry blossoms and drink our tea mindfully. Our way of acting depends on our way of thinking. That might be something to write down if you want. Our way of acting depends on our way of thinking. Our way of acting depends on our way of thinking. Deep breath. And then there's a comma after that. And our way of thinking depends on our habit energy. And our way of thinking depends on our habit energies. Isn't that juicy? Reading the whole thing again a couple times. Our way of acting depends on our way of thinking, and our way of thinking depends on our habit energies. Our way of thinking depends on our habit energies. When we recognize this, we only need to say, hello, habit energy, and make good friends with our habitual patterns of thinking and acting. When we can accept these ingrained thoughts and not feel guilty about them, they will lose much of their power over us. They will lose much of their power over us. So who's ever had habitual patterns that cause yourself suffering or cause other people suffering, and it brings up guilt, right? And what's fascinating is that in a lot, especially the Judeo-Christian, the Abrahamic faiths, guilt is often used as a motivational force or a punishment. So it can be used as motivation, it can be used as punishment. And I think a lot of us, even if we're not necessarily Christian or one of the sects of the Abrahamic faiths, because of the way the Western culture was made, we have that in us. So where it's like, if we do something out of alignment, we beat ourselves up for a certain amount of time before we can forgive ourselves and let it go, because it's like, I need to learn from this, and you beat yourself up. Or if you can't fully be there for someone else, you feel guilt, and it's like a punishment that you can't fully help someone else. And so there's just, anytime there's guilt, or one more example, who's ever watched the news and it's like that sad commercial or something, you're like, oh God, I have to do something and donate. They try to get your guilt to help you, to motivate you to donate to some cause. And so it's really interesting that we really do use guilt as a manipulation tool to make people feel bad about themselves, or to promote action, or to punish ourselves before we can move on. And all of that's just bullshit. That's a judgment. I will speak from it from a non-dualistic vocabulary. All of it is an often ineffective way of helping progress someone on their healing journey. Because when we're in guilt, it often makes us feel worse. And when we're feeling worse, it often leads to further habitual patterns, such as addictions. Because when you're feeling great, you probably are not reaching for the things that are going to take the edge off. But when you're in perpetual pain, that's when you're more likely to spill your energy onto people around you or reach for things that are going to take the edge off. And so guilt actually keeps people trapped in that cycle so much more. It's really fascinating how that works. So, hello, habit energy. We just want to recognize that exists and then come at it from what I started this conversation with, come at it from the neutral mind. Not judging it, just recognizing it. Not judging it, just recognizing it. And right there, it starts to soften the perception. And having worked with a lot of people over the years that had extreme addictions, it's incredible amount of progress people can make when they stop beating themselves up every single day. Or also not allowing other people to beat themselves up all the time when other people's judgments are saying, you're not doing enough, I can't believe what you're doing here. It's not good. It's bad. It's wrong, etc., etc., etc. And none of that is helpful whatsoever. The most helpful thing, which is what we do our best to embody in Dunisha, is to hold that neutral space, but also not just holding it, not just seeking things, but making sure that our own vessel is completely clear and aligned. Make sense? Let's take a breath. And the last one is it's a bit tricky because there's multiple definitions here. So it's Bodhichitta. And Bodhichitta normally is defined more as like the awakened or enlightened mind, but Thich Nhat Hanh shares it differently, which really matches with Dunisha, where he calls it the mind of love. The mind of love. Because when you have the awakened mind, you really are in that perpetual state of compassion. You're in that perpetual state of that ability to be neutral and not project your mental overlay on the world around you. So I'll go ahead and read this. And even if you don't have the bodhicitta, you can still cultivate it by understanding what the mind of love is. Our mind of love is the deep wish to cultivate understanding in ourselves in order to bring happiness to many beings. It is a motivating force for the practice of mindful living. With bodhicitta at the foundation of our thinking, everything we do or say will help others be liberated. And so I love that it has nothing to do with other people, because it says it's the deep wish to cultivate understanding within ourselves. And by cultivating understanding within ourselves as a byproduct, just the way we interact with the world starts to benefit. Because what happens when you have inner peace? Right? Think about that. What happens when you have inner peace? You're no longer projecting your mental overlay onto people around you. You're no longer projecting your opinions, your judgments, etc. You're able to just exist in that neutral mind of love space. And think about that. When you're going through the forest and you're a noisy, insert curse word, bleeper. When you're a noisy bleeper and you're just rushing through the forest, the animals, they're going to skedaddle, aren't they? But when you just are at peace and you sit down for a while, you're going to notice that nature around you begins to stir and the creatures start to come out. And this is it's not awful, but this is a rough example because obviously I don't eat meat, but it's an example. Hunters, they have to stay still, don't they? So they even know this, even though there's harm from their actions in that sense. But when you're just being the essence of the mind of love in those environments, you can see what happens. Or when you stick your hand in a pond and you want a fish to come eat out of your hand, you can't grasp for the fish. It's always going to swim away. But if you just have your hand there and then you have the food in your hand, the little koi fish will just naturally come up and eat out of your palm. For me, I learned this when I was 8 years old with chickens. So let's take that breath in. So recapping, since those of you at home do not have this, we have the first one is, are you sure? The second one is, what am I doing? The third one, hello, habit energy. And the fourth one is bodhicitta, the mind of love. So recognizing that the mind of love, we want to set that as a foundation from which we perceive the world and just have it in the corner of our mind, every corner of our mind, sure. Have it at the forefront of our mind every single day and recognizing that it's possible to exist in that neutral place where we're not projecting our mental overlay. Hello, habit energy. Again, that further helps us because when we can recognize our patterns from a gentle curiosity place rather than a harsh, I need to fix this now place, you're going to see a lot smoother progress because you're not in judgment anymore of it. And of course, producing shame or guilt within yourself or other people. And the second one, what am I doing? Recognizing just throughout the day, ask myself that or have a reminder on my phone. What am I doing in this moment? Oh, I'm not present right now. Thank you for this reminder. I'm going to take a breath and look around me and touch life once more. And then, am I sure? Am I sure? Really taking a second look, a third look, a fourth look, a fifth look at our perceptions and our belief systems. But please do not misinterpret me here and fall into analysis paralysis, because when you get into analysis paralysis, that's not helping things either. It's just maybe you have a meditation And after 5 minutes of the meditation, you take the time to look at something from that calm, sacred space. And then you notice you're getting a little too wrapped up in it, take a step back, take another breath. And then when you find yourself composed, re-enter it. And then just kind of do that soft dance back and forth a little bit. Because if you go too far down the rabbit hole, you're just, who's ever just spun, and there's really no solution that came about it. So you really want to recognize the habitual patterns of doing that, but then also being able to second guess yourself, third guess yourself, really the things, especially the belief systems that make up your reality. And I'm not just talking about like religion or politics. That's not even what I'm talking about right now when I say belief systems. I'm talking about the ways, the hard beliefs that you have on yourself. Because all of us have major belief systems of I'm not good enough. Or not everyone, but a lot of us have some insecure belief systems. But also maybe we are not so much beating ourselves up, but we might be beating the world up with our thoughts, judging the world. And so whether it's internal or external, we really want to explore that more and then take a step back so we can enter into the Bodhichitta mind of love and the neutralness that we preach here. Isn't that delicious? Let's take a breath. And so I'll just end with the sentence that we started with in the soul packet. Where there is perception, there is deception. Deception is such a harsh word, but it rhymes. So we'll give it a pass. But where there is perception, there is deception. And just recognizing that the moment I start to analyze and look at something, I'm making it more about me than about the actual thing. And I would say this is the one hardest practice of wearing the black robes that we look for with teachers, is that being able to just fully perceive and hold space for the individual and let them tell us what their needs are, rather than getting caught up in our own views of what we think is best for them, because that often leads to a lot of harm. And we start to project that onto the world around us rather than just remaining in the neutral mindedness of it. And so we take a breath in and we let go. And the hardest people to try it on is your spouse or the loved ones in your life. Because again, we have a view of what we think is right and wrong and how we might have been harmed, etc., and the lack of feeling appreciated, etc., etc., etc. But again, this goes back to many previous sermons I give, and it's just opening up a safe place for listening to occur. And it may take us to first be that listener and just allow them to just spew whatever has been weighing on their heart, holding space for that, and then entering into that conversation, letting them explain what they're perceiving, and then you're able to explain what you're perceiving, and then there's a unity that can often be found. But sometimes there's not, and that's okay too. But at least you're starting that conversation, and that's really beautiful to be having. So we take a deep breath in, and we let go. Oh, one more breath, please. So thank you, YouTubers, for tuning in. As always, there are links down below to our websites, Patreon, and PayPal. And so I've heard some people have been having issues with PayPal that may not be able to do donations. What's nice too is that if you click our Patreon account, that is another way in which you can set up, I don't know if there's just a one-time, but you can definitely do a reoccurring small donation there if you feel so inclined. So there's two different ways if PayPal's not working out for you, or maybe Patreon's not working out for you. So we appreciate the donations, and they help tremendously. So thank you, and we will see you all next week.